So we are back at it again. I am Elizabeth Schneider, podcaster of Wine for Normal People and author of Wine for Normal People. I can't believe the book is finally coming to a close after many, many years of writing. And you are?
I'm Darrah. I am not a podcaster for Wine for Normal People, but I am a podcaster with you now.
We have covered a bunch of different topics in our pursuit to clarify the world through our entrepreneur eyes here. And I think today is a problem that we encounter together, and we have encountered many times in our 10 plus years of friendship. This is what we will call the Jenn problem.
We like pseudonyms and we like saving people's reputation and identities. So, quote unquote, Jenn Problem.
This is what happens when I like to call this the cleaning of the friend closet. This is a giant problem when you have someone who is a horribly negative force in your life, but they're also a business contact. That is just not a good situation. Yeah. It's bad enough that you were friends with this person ahead of time. And I really blame you for this situation because,
it is my fault.
It is your fault.
Yeah, we'll let people in on it. But I think another way that I look at it from like the macro overview is this is about reputation. And this is about what happens when someone's trying to blaspheme your reputation.
That, and also, how do you gently navigate crazy? Right?
I love the way you say things, and then I'm like, let me just lighten that up a little.
I know, but honestly,
yeah, it's how do you navigate crazy, or really in other cases, because it's not always about the extreme. In some cases it is, and in the Jenn case, we'll talk about that. But in other cases, it's how do you navigate when you've outgrown someone? And I don't mean that negatively, but when you've grown in a different direction.
I mean, I just think sometimes things stop working, and sometimes you can just, the best scenarios are when you can just both ghost and it's fine. But there are a lot of times that I think you and I have both found where we want to ghost and somebody else doesn't.
Totally.
And that is very difficult. Okay, so let's talk about the Jenn issue. You can talk about your legacy with Jenn, and then I can talk about my introduction to Jenn. And I don't know whether we want to go down the road of the last time I saw Jenn, taking her to a facility.
Yeah, I think that that's a part of it. But here's the quick and dirty, folks. So I went to college with Jenn. Jenn became one of my fast friends. We even studied abroad together. And Jenn was someone who I adored for her friendship and loyalty. And we had a bit of a yin and yang vibe. And when it came time to work in the professional world as adults, Jenn and I were side by side. There was even a point in time where she helped me get hired at her company after I had been laid off once or twice. And we had a great time doing that. And as time went on, I introduced Elizabeth to Jenn because Elizabeth, as we talked about in a previous episode, was a new friend who I made jump through some hoops to become my friend in the first place. And
Jenn did not make me jump through any of those hoops.
Jenn didn't, because Jenn was much easier than I was to become friends with. And because like in any relationship, I think when you have trust in someone and they say, hey, this person's great, then that trust is transitive. And so you got in through the back door with Jenn.
All right. Except this is another thing that I will say that I learned from this thing with Jenn. So I had coffee with Jenn in Atlanta, and then we had a lovely time because all of the things that you said about Jenn are absolutely true. She's very loyal. She was very kind. She was funny. She had a dry sense of humor, all of the things that I find to be totally positive, smart. But what I did not recognize, which I have started to recognize now, and it was a great learning, is that Jenn really wanted to be friends way too fast. So whereas you wanted to be friends way too slow, she wanted to be friends way too fast.
This is like a Goldilocks story. It's like one's too hot, one's too cold.
It really is. The porridge was not right. Thank God I had my friend Gigi, who was just right in the middle there. God love you, Gigi. I would rather have, someone like you because we could figure out how we were going to be friends over the course of time. But when you see this, I think this is a real red flag. When someone is so gung-ho about being your friend that they are constantly texting you or constantly calling you or constantly recommending that you get together. At first, it can feel very flattering and it can feel very nice, but I do think it's a bit of a red flag.
I feel you. I think that that's actually something I saw in all sorts of her relationships, and I only noticed it predominantly at first when it came to dating, where she would jump in and be in love and it would be head over heels. And that seemed a little bit odd. And then I agree that when it came to friendships, she was the one who would be throwing you your birthday party 2 days after she met you. And
Exactly.
while we're not here to, say or talk shit about how people run their friendships, for us at least, that was something like anything in any relationship retrospectively, you can see the writing on the wall a lot differently than you can see it when you're in it.
Well, when you're in it, it just feels very flattering and very nice. And then this took on a lot of different dimensions because the issue for you and for me, besides the fact that she tried to drive a wedge between us, which ultimately did not work, obviously, is that we also all did professional stuff together. We were hustling entrepreneurs. She had taken on opening a branch of her business, her family's business in Atlanta. We were all going to the same networking events and we were all trying to build our business and we were all trying to help each other. And you and I both became her clients also.
Truth. Yeah. I mean, I think where we're kind of going with this story, and I want to get there for our listeners, is that it hit a point where things took a turn. And it came to the point where if Elizabeth and I hadn't have been honest with each other and forthcoming about what was happening behind each of our backs, we probably would have ended our friendship and stayed friends with Jenn. And so what ultimately happened was that Elizabeth and I came to each other and said, I'm hearing these things from Jenn. Can you please tell me what's going on? And they were all really defamatory, mean things that Jenn was telling the other to fuel some fire that didn't exist about the other. And certainly I have no idea what the intention was on Jenn's part to do that. My best guess would be some sort of jealousy or wanting to have control of the friendships. But regardless, if it weren't for Elizabeth and I recognizing that, then we probably would have ditched each other and held on to Jenn. And I believe that there's karmic retribution, and it would have come back to us and her at some point, and we would have learned Jenn wasn't the friend that we needed. But what really...
Do you really think you would have stayed friends with her?
I think if I didn't know, I think there would have been a time and a place where the same thing would have happened.
My point with her was a little bit different than you because I had just had a baby, if you recall.
Yeah.
And she started exhibiting behavior that I thought was a little bit not okay. And it all culminated in her winding up me with my baby, taking her to a facility because her parents were somewhere else to go take a little rest. And it was after that point that I said, you know what, this has gotten too intense. I don't know this person well enough to be doing this with my baby. Because it took like hours and hours. And I felt like there was some danger in that relationship. But beyond that, it's the aftermath of all of this that I found very fraught because we were going to networking events where everybody knew each other and we would go together. We would go to, Chamber of Commerce things. We would just have professional meetings and people would say, oh, you know Jenn, right? And then all of a sudden it was incredibly uncomfortable because everyone was seeing the side of Jenn that we had seen at first, which was she'll throw you a party 2 days after your for your birthday after meeting you, but they don't see that there's something a little bit off about that. And so I found it very difficult to then say, well, we're not, because you got to navigate. It's exactly what you're getting at, which is reputationally, you have to be careful because you don't want to ruin her reputation. Clearly, in my mind, she was troubled. And so I didn't want to go there. To your point about karmic retribution, I did not want that on my hands.
Totally.
But at the same time, what are you going to do? You're going to say, oh yeah, I'll tell her, we hang out all the time. I mean, things had changed. And so in that professional world, it then became incredibly fraught, at least for me, to try to explain to people, and probably in your social circle too. Didn't you guys also have some mutual friends?
Tons. I mean, we went to college together and we grew our social circle together after college when we stayed in Atlanta together. But the other piece of this context that I think is important from my perspective is that not only was I her client, not only did we want to work together, not only was she one of my best friends at the time and were we in the same networking communities, but she also at the time was helping me build one of my new endeavors. So she was intricately and intimately involved there. And so when she returned from this facility that you were talking about, we had a bit of a tete-a-tete when I would show up to these environments and people would say to me, oh, did you know that Jenn is saying this about you and that about you? And basically she was saying things like, I only cared about business and I didn't care about our friendship and all these other things to really malign me and my reputation and everything that I stood for. And then you're in this position, much to your point, Elizabeth, where you're standing face to face with someone, you're completely blindsided, and you're having to decide how much you want to share with this person. Because ultimately, it is my belief that the person who is saying and spreading negativity is the one who looks bad. So
Completely.
I could be the one who got into the weeds with her and really went punch for punch and said, well, let me tell you the truth and let me tell you what's going on. But I chose not to do that. Tell me what your experience was like in those situations.
Well, all I could think about was, and I'll say that before I went to, this is why I love UNC so much. I feel like going to business school gave me that degree of polish that I needed to know, to have the political savvy not to go there. Because I think before I went to business school, I would have totally gone after her for the stuff that she was saying. But I just thought to myself, okay, just act professional, because in a professional environment, I mean, you know what? I have to say this though. I had a similar situation right when I got out of college where one of my best friends who I did not get along with at all, came to work at the company I was working at and started spreading all of these horrible rumors. She was saying like I was a dark, melancholy person, that I couldn't get along with people because I had problems with her. And it was getting back to people like my boss. And it was a really big issue. So I actually took her in a room and I was like, you say whatever you want about me outside of these doors, but don't you ever in a professional environment say these things about me, because there's so much more on the line than just you being a bitch. And after that, it really did simmer down and I made sure that it wasn't going to happen again. And I even spoke to her friend, who I was no longer friends with at that point, and said to her, look, this friend is working with me now. You've got to rein her in. So I think that there's a degree of professionalism that no matter how tempting it is to go after somebody, you have to shut up. You just have to shut up, because you're going to seem like a giant bitch if you go after that person.
Totally. And I think there's a couple really critical lessons in here. One is the first one that we said, that the negativity is really often related and taken back to the person who's spreading it, not to the person they're trying to make the victim of it. So don't be that person. Number two is live out your values, that if you're the person who believes in having a positive reputation and being a person of integrity, then don't get mixed up in that mudslinging. And then lastly, I love what you did, and I did the exact same thing, which is talk directly to the person slinging the mud.
Oh, yeah.
And see if you can nip it in the bud. Because for me, I went straight to Jenn and I said, hey, I'm hearing these things and I'd love to hear your side of the story. And then when she shared it, I said, I really thought you and I had handled this. I thought we had done it respectfully. I thought we were on the same page. Clearly that wasn't the case. So I'll take mutual responsibility. Now, can you promise me that I'm not going to find myself in this position again where I'm hearing these types of rumors about me? And we came to an agreement. Then when I went back into those environments and heard them yet again, that for me was the final straw. Because at that point, when your words and your actions don't align and you've made a commitment and a promise to me, then that's enough. And then you have demonstrated to me who you are, as opposed to telling me one thing, but your actions are speaking much more loudly. But that was really critical, because I wasn't going to just be in the position where I surmised what she thought or I jumped to a massive conclusion, especially when we had the history that we did. But at that point, it was too many strikes. I did what I thought was in alignment with my integrity and my values, and I kept it moving.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is you do have to stand up for what you believe in. Obviously, as I said at the beginning, and I think you agree, there are many less severe situations than this. This was obviously somebody who had some problems, and this was somebody that was looking to damage both of our reputations and was looking to drive a wedge between us and had jealousy issues and was just generally unhappy, which is really not a good sign. It was somebody who neither of us really could have in our lives anymore, because it was just not, it wasn't a good, it was not a good thing. So you had to clean the friend closet. But I think there's a better way to do it if you can, which is just sort of, like I said, ghost out. Try to figure out if there's a way that you can just spend less time with the person. Try to figure out if you can just cool the relationship down to the point where you can be acquaintances and it's not awkward. That is the best possible scenario, I think. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And this kind of goes to the how do you pull that exit? And I think so much of this is akin to dating culture, where Do you ghost? Do you drop out altogether? Do you be respectful? Do you say something? And it's tough because I've tried to navigate each of these potential ways of doing it. And generally, what I found is when I have a direct conversation with someone, to just say, like, hey, sorry, I've not been around as much, or whatever the circumstances are. However, I just feel like we've grown in different directions. People tend to get really defensive and take it really personally. And I've had that backlash at me in a number of ways. So I have tended to find exactly what you're saying, that if you can make it a little bit more copacetic where no one has to say anything directly, but you are both sort of moving away in different directions, that's super great and natural. But I've also come to find that's not often the case. And typically one party is holding on when the other party is trying to let go. And that's when some of the shit slinging begins.
Oh, it definitely does. But I would say I'm going to have to disagree on the dating culture versus and again, I haven't been in the dating world in a little while now, but look, I dated plenty when I was your age. No, I dated plenty when I was younger. And I can say that I always chose the active cutoff because it was just easier to be direct with somebody and be like, okay, I need to get this over with so I can move on. For me, it was never a good thing to ghost. So I always just preferred, and if I thought the guy was ghosting, I would just be like, what's going on? Let's just end this.
Oh, I want to make it really clear. I'm not saying you should ghost, but I'm saying in a friendship environment, it's not always well received when you say, hey, I'm stepping away from this friendship. But I do think there's ways for you to do that respectfully and say, like, hey, these are my priorities right now. And that might mean that our friendship is shifting. Versus when you say to someone, like, we've grown apart, and you make it any position where they might feel defensive versus you owning it and just saying, like, hey, like for me, it was really easy when I started traveling a lot more. And I just would say to some of my friends, listen, it doesn't mean that I don't care about you. Our friendship's probably going to start looking different on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not going to be physically around as much. And it made it a more natural separation where no one felt like it was an attack on them.
That's so interesting because I would say, so with the dating, I always did the active cutoff. But with friendships, I always tried more to just ease off and be busy, but not to actively confront it, because I've found exactly what you're saying. I think that as soon as you start to confront that, instead of just create space for yourself, and as soon as you start to just address it head on with friendships, I think it can be deeply personal for people. With dating, it is deeply personal, and that's just, people just accept it. You just say, look, this sucks. I'm not into you. Goodbye. But I think that with friendships, because of exactly what we're talking about, reputational issues, the fact that you'll be viewed as a bitch, the fact that if you're too upfront with people, there's a lot of hurt. I think it is better to figure out a way to ease off of it without confronting it actively. I have to say, like, I know that that's kind of against the modern philosophy, but I think with friendships, it's better to change the friendship actively. So take action to change how you're going to participate in the friendship rather than talk about it. You're probably going to disagree with that, but that's kind of my philosophy.
It's not that I disagree. I do think, though, it's so much more acceptable in dating culture because people are used to sort of the churn of dating. That's the entire nature of it, is you're going through different people and learning lessons and having different experiences until you find, in most cases, the one person you want to be with, and obviously not in everyone's situation. However, in friendships, that's not usually the case. Typically, people see it as we become friends, we stay friends, or maybe we grow apart a bit. But it's when there's a clinging on one side that I think that becomes more challenging. And that certainly also happens in dating. But it's, again, a lot more common and understood that there are ends to a lot of relationships in the dating environment than there are in friendships. So I say that simply to say to people, recognize that there might be some backlash. And that's okay, because ultimately you need to do what's best for you. One of the things that I've come to find is that people will make it personal. They will say to you, or at least they've said to me, things like, oh, you just think you're better than me, or oh, you're like thinking that you've grown over here and that I'm not good enough for you. And so whatever it is, it can become personal. I think it's really just up to you to stand in your integrity. I'm going to keep saying that over and over because that's really what it's about. If your actions are in alignment with what you really believe in, that's all you can control. You can never control someone else's response.
I think we just approach it in a totally different way. I agree with you, but I do it more I don't like to have that confrontation. And that's just, it's funny because I have no problem like confronting Comcast about my cable bill. But with friends, I feel like because there is so much that people, they put so much into it and think that you are doing something to them when you're really doing something for yourself, because it is no longer productive to have that relationship in your life. For me, it's just better to say, okay, I'm taking some time for myself and not call you as much and not be available. And then eventually, even if the person is quite clingy, you don't have to have the conversation, because you're right. It's not acceptable in friendship to clean out the closet, but it's got to happen. It's absolutely got to happen. I think your way, you probably feel less guilty than I do. I feel horrible guilt when I ghost out. But I mean, I'm thinking right now, actually, that's really funny, because I'm thinking that there's a mom friend, because my younger daughter was going to preschool, and there was a mom friend, and she was kind of clingy, and she really wanted like an instant friendship with me. And I know myself well enough to know that this was not going to be a friendship made in heaven. But, we did a few play dates and had some fun together with the girls. And she was like, call me, and like constantly texting me. And I was like, I'm not going to confront this. I'm just going to sort of not answer. And with time, it cooled down. I'm sure she thinks I'm a terrible person. I'm okay with that. I feel a little bit guilty about it. I don't like being seen that way. But at the same time, she knows I'm super busy. And so she can fill in the gaps in her head about me, rather than saying, you know what? You're just not somebody I really want to hang out with.
It's so interesting to think about that, because one, I had so much guilt around Jenn, because especially at the time when this happened, she was just coming out of the facility that we've talked about. So you feel like, oh, there's this obligation to stay around someone in their time of need. Although not only did you physically take her there, and I wrote her letters every week and picked up a lot of her slack in places in her life that she was not there for, that you still have this sense of guilt. And I've had it many times where friendships have grown apart, where you have this wondering of, well, do they feel a certain way, and could it have been different, and should I have done this or that? But ultimately, you've got to always be considerate for what your real needs are, because if you don't show up fully and wholly into any situation, you're not doing yourself or anyone else a service. And part of what you're talking about now is this idea of taking the long view, that when you slowly gave this woman the hint, in the long view perspective, it didn't really matter. She has other friends, you have other friends, there's no real bad blood in the end. So I think that's a really important thing to consider, that all these years have passed. How many has it been for us? Like 7 or 8 since this breakup with Jenn. And that I don't think she gives us the time of day or a thought at all, a modicum of even a thought. And we do now, because we're having this conversation, because we've learned something from it. But I don't day to day think about, oh, I feel guilty for that, or I feel anything about it. And any of the fears I had about what other people thought of me because of the rumors and the bullshit that she was spreading about you or me didn't matter anymore, because in the long-term horizon, people saw who I really was. And those who didn't, that was their choice. But I think long-term view, it's like anything. Is it going to really matter in a week or a month or a year? Probably not. The other thing that I think about with this whole conversation is how important the people around you and your community and your network are to help rectify any of the damage that could possibly be done by someone spreading shit about you.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, I'm thinking about a conversation I had with a friend of mine whose actual name is Jordan, and I'm going to say his actual name because we did a piece together in Forbes about this. And Jordan was the founder of a podcast that had over 1 million downloads for each episode. It's one of the most popular podcasts out there for business and personal development. And his partner sort of publicly took over the podcast that was under his name. So he took it over. It went into this major lawsuit, and the other guy started going around spreading horrible rumors about him, as well as making up lies about that his last name was actually Jordan's last name, so that it made sense that the podcast was still under his name and Jordan got pushed out of his own business. So not only was his reputation being sullied, but he was messing with a really legitimate business that this man had grown with him. And so when Jordan and I connected, one of the things Jordan and I talked about was how important his network was in helping him repair the reputational damage that was being caused by his former business partner, where he said that he would hear from people that they'd be at a party or they'd be at an event, and someone would be talking about, oh, did you hear about Jordan and so, and did you hear what happened? And so told me this about Jordan. And then one of Jordan's friends would step up and say, honestly, that's not who I know Jordan to be. I'm pretty sure there's another side to that story, and that Jordan would never have to say that for himself, and that the weight was twofold, the amount of power when someone else spoke up for him. And that only comes when you are constantly pouring into your relationships in a positive way, that someone's going to stand up for you in those moments.
Yeah, and you have to be that person too, by the way.
Totally.
This all goes back to this idea of integrity and about look, it doesn't matter to me who you are or what stage you're in or how you feel. We all have a gut feeling about how things should go. And hopefully, most of us have a pretty decent moral compass. And you're going to say, that's not right. Well, guess what? In a world with much injustice, it's super important for you to stand up for what you feel is the right thing to do. And that includes in these friendship situations, one, I think it goes, just to sort of summarize. I mean, we're saying one, you do not talk shit about somebody. You just say, there's two sides to the story. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Two is somebody is coming back and saying things about someone that you love and know. You've got to defend them. I mean, that's bullying. And it is up to us as responsible adults who have a conscience to say, you know what? I am not going to listen to you talk about my friend that way. I didn't feel as guilty about the Jen issue because I didn't know her as well. My friendship with her wasn't as long. And I had a great excuse because I just had a baby and my baby was a lot of work. It was easier for me to extract myself from the situation. But I felt guilty about it, but I needed to find a way to get out of it, and I did. Number one, you need to identify when someone is a succubus, basically.
Trademark.
And you need to get rid of them. You need to get them out of your lives. Now, how you decide to do that, whether you take the direct route or whether you take a more gentle phase out over time, it is what it is. And you do have to expect that someone is going to take umbrage at the fact that you do not want to be friends with them. But you do it in a way that is going to be upstanding. You're under no obligation to be friends with anybody in this world, but you need to make sure that how you treat people is how you would want to be treated in the same situation. I think that story about your friend is just awful. I mean, I don't even know what I would do. Actually, similarly, I had a business partner who took an idea that we were forming together and left with it. And it was my husband's best friend from high school's wife.
Ooh.
How about that? Yeah.
But so this actually goes to a point that we didn't really elaborate on that you brought up earlier, which is what happens when you're in the same friend circles or even in the same community of business, where it's almost like a divorce, where there becomes this determining whether or not it's overt or not, that you have to make some decisions. Like, do you want to show up to the same place as this person every time when you're supposed to be having a good time and socializing? So I had to sort of pick and choose, like you and I obviously trust each other. And then with other friends, I sort of made the determination that if they came from her, they had a closer relationship, I was going to let that go. And that I would keep investing in the ones that I felt closer with. And that some of them remained friends with both of us. But very quickly, it became evident that we weren't going to be going to the same places. We weren't going to be trying to show up to the same parties, events, dinners, and so on. And same thing with like the chambers of commerce, the networking environments that we were in, that I think there became this natural understanding of like, this is my turf and this is your turf. But when that's not the case, that can be exceptionally uncomfortable.
But I do think it is like a divorce because at some point you do need to determine you don't want to see that person, frankly. And I don't think there's no point in being a hero. If you've decided that you don't want to be friends with somebody, you don't want to be married to them, you don't want to be dating them, unless there's some way that you are extraordinarily mature beyond, and I don't even know if it's maturity. I mean, you'd have to be pretty exceptional to be able to ignore the elephant in the room. You got to just remold your social interactions a little bit more. This goes back to the guilt factor. And then people always say, why should I have to change my social life because somebody like Jen's going to be there? Well, guess what? You have to. I'm sorry.
Or you don't have to, but exactly. But then the outcome of that is on you, that you're uncomfortable and everyone else is uncomfortable.
If you want to carry on and have a comfortable time and have a good time, you're going to have to change things slightly, at least for a little while. And my opinion is suck it up. Find another friend who you can do an activity with that night, or go and just expect that it's going to be dodgy. And especially with a person like Jenn, she is going to be talking shit about you the entire time you're there.
Yep.
Because I got to say, I mean, Darrah, seriously, if you and I showed up at some place that she was there, she would totally be talking shit about us immediately.
You know what's funny is in all of these 7 or 8 years, I have seen her physically twice, but they have been so fleeting and passing where my heart literally skipped a beat for a second because I was so nervous about oh my gosh, I haven't come face to face with this person, but we never had to
you
interact.
Called me both times.
Right. And it's in such they were both in such large scale environments that it didn't matter. And we could both pretend we didn't see each other. And while generally that's not my MO and I would like step up, in that case, I just felt like there was no value that was going to come out of it. But yeah, I mean, it's like seeing a ghost. And that's exactly how it felt in those moments.
And it's a little terrifying, frankly. But look, we got to own our decisions too. I would probably do what you did. I would just ignore the situation and try to just move on, because I am not looking to incite that person, especially someone like her, where, there can be situations where you've decided to ghost on somebody or they've decided to ghost on you, and it can still be a pleasant interaction. That's usually why that works. You kind of just stopped hanging out so much.
Yeah, I've totally dated those people where that happens, and that's totally cool.
No, I mean, either you date them or, you had a friendship where you hung out a bunch and then everybody got busy, or you had some weird night out and it didn't go well and you decided you weren't going to, but you still think fondly of that person. It's fine. You're not going to be best friends with them. I mean, it's sort of like this mom friend that I was describing before. If I see her, I'll give her a hug and talk to her. And will I go out with her? No, I'm not going to go out with her, but it's fine. It's absolutely fine. We didn't go deep enough down the path for it to be really bad. And sometimes those situations can be fine, but in a volatile situation with a potentially volatile person that you've cut out of your life because you have found that, I mean, in my case, I think someone like Jenn was a little dangerous for me to be around. I felt she was unpredictable. Her instability and I'm not just talking about because, she wound up in a facility, but I think even before then, she's a very unstable person and somebody who could turn on you and could really, if she put her mind to it, wreck you. I don't like the kind of negativity in my life. I want to get rid of that. And I'd rather have no friends than have that.
One of the things you taught me in this interaction was the concept of poking the bear. And I had never heard that phrase, but you kept reminding me, like, don't poke the bear. But it's interesting because I still have a friendship with several people, but I think about one in particular who he and I were super, super close for many, many years. And we naturally grew apart, and it was never a negative situation whatsoever. But I still reach out to him on his birthday. I still reach out on holidays. And neither of us are really in the mindset of, hey, let's get back together. There's no force or pressure. But we've naturally gotten to that evolutionary state in our friendship where we know that we still care. We don't have to see each other or have regular conversations to know that. So I do think there's a lot of ways that this can evolve positively as well.
Absolutely. But I think for us, just talking about this situation, it's important because I feel like this is a situation that everyone has. At one point or another, you're going to have this, whether it be dating or whether it be in a friendship. And I think that the most important thing to do, as we've discussed, just to sort of wrap it up, is to make sure that you're cutting ties in a way that feels comfortable. I totally forgot about the poking the bear, but do not poke the bear. If there is a bear, do not poke it. Just find a way around a bad situation. And then also reach out to your champions. Look, you're going to have to talk about the situation with somebody. And make sure that, you have someone to talk about it with, because it is an uncomfortable situation and you need advice. But always try to do what feels right to you, unless that thing is going to be something that's going to negatively impact your reputation, like screaming at somebody in public. Or
in this case, Elizabeth, you and I think we're each other's venting person, because we obviously were intimately involved in the situation and we were unwilling to let it get out into the public. So I think that's okay. Choose that one person or two people who you really trust and who you can share your grievances with, and then move on.
Yeah. So make sure you share every single detail of every interaction like we did. All right. So I think that's all we've got on the Jenn problem. So we would love to hear from you guys about what happens when you want to end a friendship, and what have you done and what have you tried and how has it affected your professional life and how have you handled it? I think it'd be really a very interesting topic. So hit us up on Instagram and let's get that conversation rolling. Until next time.
See you then.